So today we are looking at FRQ number 2, which is the argumentative FRQ for AP Art History. So the argumentative FRQ can be one that is really intimidating to people, but no need. It's actually a little bit easier than we think. The big thing that scares people is the fact for FRQ number 2, you are not provided an image. So you gotta use your noggin to try to remember what the artworks look like. However, you will always be given a choice of 3 artworks. The big thing with argumentative is that you will need to create a strong thesis that is related to what the prompt is asking, and then back up that thesis with specific evidence. This is a longer format FRQ, so they recommend spending 25 to 30 minutes on this. I say 25 here, 35 compare and contrast. Compare and contrast just takes a little bit longer. So big thing with this, with all the FRQs, make sure you follow the prompt. So really look at what it's asking you so that you can answer the prompt as accurately and get as many points as possible. Best thing to do is to always restate parts of the question as your sentence starter. It's really easy on this FRQ for people to kind of get lost in talking about a piece that they forget that they're supposed to be making an argument. So we want to make an argument. We're going to take a look at examples so that we can understand how to read the argumentative FRQ and see how to write one. I am pulling from 2024's exam. To me, this one, crazy challenging. It happened to be one of those ones that we didn't cover very strongly. But overall, the format, not too bad. So I'm going to read aloud. Works of architecture built in later Europe and the Americas often demonstrate a variety of architectural styles inspired by earlier time periods. So that first sentence for argumentative usually is going to be kind of like setting the stage, thinking about what the bigger picture of this question is going to be about. So we know it's architecture. We know it's later Europe and Americas, so content area 4. And we know that it's about being inspired by earlier time periods. So those are those 3 big components. That little first section where it sets the stage, really pay attention because that's going to be kind of the whole theme of your response. Next thing it says, select and completely identify one of the objects from the list below, or any other relevant work of architecture from later Europe and the Americas that demonstrate a revival of an earlier architectural style. Our choices, so we look down, because then we can start thinking while we're reading the rest of it. We have Monticello, we have Palace of Westminster, we have House in Newcastle County. So we have another choice, just like the compare and contrast FRQ. We choose one of these pieces. Whichever one you feel like I can talk about the being inspired part the most. Something that you have the most evidence for in the back of your brain. For my class last year, that was going to be Monticello. So most of them wrote about Monticello. For this, I'm going to write about Parliament because I think it's interesting. It does advise, and this is where I always, I get nervous, if you do go off the list, it's saying you can use another architecture piece. It just has to make sure that it's architecture, it's in content area 4, and that it still demonstrates a revival of earlier architectural style. That doesn't leave a lot of wiggle room, so keeping it here in Monticello, Palace of Westminster, or House in Newcastle County, much better, much safer. Try to stay on the list. Only in worst case scenario, go off the list. All right, so then for the argumentative FRQ, it has this little section here. It will always sort of look like this. This section, the explain, sets the stage for what your thesis is going to be about. So in this case, it says, explain why the architect adapted an earlier architectural style to design a building in the architect's own time. That's what your thesis is going to be about, is making a statement about this. And then it'll list what you need for that argumentative. It's usually similar, if not exactly the same. First thing is to provide 2 accurate identifiers for the work of art you have selected. So once you pick, always start with those identifiers, knock them out, do that. Reminder that this section down here, this one identifying the work, you don't even really need to read it. That's just the reminder of, oh shoot, what's an identifier again? Right, here we are. It has the list. Then it says respond to the prompt with an art historically defensible claim or thesis that establishes a line of reasoning. You need a thesis statement. The best way to do that will always be the architect adapted an earlier architectural style of blank to blah, 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 blah. I'll show you the sentence starter in a little bit. But you want to specifically talk about what it's asking you to explain. If you are going off the cuff here and you're just like, Monticello is pretty, and then you talk about how Monticello is pretty for the entire thing, that's not going to be a defensible claim. It has nothing to do with being inspired by earlier architecture, and the evidence is going to not support any line of reasoning. So this is most similar to like a normal essay. If you want to think of this as an argumentative essay, do it. You don't need an intro, conclusion, none of that, but you do need a thesis statement. The next 2 points are going to be your evidence. So 2 task points there. Support your claim with at least 2 examples of relevant visual and/or contextual evidence. Make sure you pay attention. Sometimes it gives both, sometimes it gives one. So visual and/or, so we have both options. Next task point, explain how the evidence supports the claim. So just stating the evidence, you get 2 points, 1 for each example of evidence, and then you get the additional point for tying it back to the thesis. And then lastly, the last point, corroborate or qualify your claim by explaining relevant connections, providing nuance, or considering diverse views. We'll get into this, but you can think of it as either continuing to yap, so that would be nuance, right? Or doing like a little compare contrast, or like a counter argument. It's just a little bit more about the piece or connecting it to a larger idea to show that not only can you answer these points up here, but you like know the artwork. So this will always be the format for argumentative. It'll give you the concept. You'll have to identify. You'll have to create a thesis. You'll have to support, explain, and then add nuance every single time. This is the most like clear cut of it's gonna look like this, so that's kind of nice. No, we don't have an image, but again, just to kind of show you what to pay attention to, this is gonna be important to explaining the thesis. Use the bullet point section, and it will be in bullets to make sure that you are going through and doing each of those task points. You can ignore the big when identifying the work section. And then again, you can do, I would choose one on the list, but if you go off the list, just make sure it fits within the question. Let's break it down now. So task 1 is to provide 2 accurate identifiers. If you watch the compare and contrast video, you know how to do this. The big thing is to always start with this point. A lot of people, they'll dive into their thesis and they'll forget to put identifiers. Got to put those identifiers down. So whatever one you pick, you put identifiers, and you put every type of identifier, even if it's wrong, as long as 2 of them are right, yeah, get the point. So the name of the artwork won't count when it's given to you, but artists, culture, location, dates, media, art movements, any of those kind of things as listed, totally count, right? So here I have the Palace of Westminster was designed by Barry and Pugin in 1840 to 1870. It was made from limestone masonry and glass and is located in London, England. It is part of the neo-Gothic movement that happened around Romanticism. That's like all the super accurate stuff. For me, I would be able to list that it was in England and that it was neo-Gothic / Romanticism, but I would still include the artist names. I can make some up, and I could probably come up with the fact that there is some kind of stone. Masonry is always fancy stonework. So media and artists are easy ones to try to remember, like to memorize. Focus on those. Dates, just throw out a number, pray that it's close. And art movements are really great to memorize. But make sure you write this and you include something for everything that, work for the piece, because you want to make sure you get the easy points. Then you actually move into your thesis. This is the crux of this FRQ. If your thesis is super weak, unrelated, or not something you can really talk about easily, the evidence section is going to kind of fall apart on you. So really focus in on a solid thesis, but don't sit there and go, what could my thesis be? You don't have time. You have 25 minutes to write basically an essay, right? So with the thesis, again, the task says, explain why the architect adapted an earlier architectural style to design a building in the architect's own time. Usually, you can say the artwork blank because blank for a thesis. So the artwork, in this case, the Palace of Westminster, and then I can use the prompt as my sentence starter. The Palace of Westminster adapts earlier, now I could specify, Gothic-styled architecture to resonate, so here's my because, to resonate with British ideals that were reacting against the Industrial Revolution. I took the artwork, I took the prompt of adapting earlier architectural style, I stated what architectural style it adapted, and then I explained why they adapted that style. You have to be clear. You can't just say the Palace of Westminster adapted an earlier architectural style to build something in the architect's own time. You said nothing, right? You can't just state the prompt. You have to explain the prompt. So again, I'm taking the artwork, Palace of Westminster, what it's adapting, which I'm pulling from the prompt, adapting earlier Gothic, and then explaining why. In this case, I'm talking about Industrial Revolution. Boom, strong thesis. Now I can back that up with evidence. Artwork blank because blank. Strong, powerful why. Usually with a strong why, you're looking at contextual. So think of the context, the bigger history stuff, bigger themes like power, authority, narratives, allegories, culture, society, things like that are going to be your stronger, bigger whys. Hopefully thesis can be locked in, so then you can start adding evidence. If you're not confident with your thesis, you can always go back and fix it if you have any extra time. So again, don't spend forever. Start moving on to your evidence. For evidence, this is task 3 and 4. It says, support your claim with at least 2 examples of relevant visual and/or contextual evidence. Number 1, I have the option of both, visual or contextual. Number 2, this has to be related to my thesis. I've read tons of FRQs in which if it has a thesis, even because a lot of people forget to add a thesis, they'll start talking about just visual characteristics, or they're describing what it looks like, or some history behind the artwork, but it's not explaining anything. It's not supporting anything. We have thesis. She needs little columns to hold her up. It's like a post-lintel system of task points, right? So tasks 3 and 4 are about your thesis. So you can use some fill in the blank sentence starters, like the artwork shows, and then restate part of your thesis. You don't have to restate the whole thing. You already wrote the whole thing. So the artwork shows blank because blank, and then you provide the evidence. And then you do it a second time because it's 2 examples, 2 task points. So that's why I have it listed there twice. Make sure it ties to your thesis. Make sure you pay attention to whether it says visual, contextual, or that little nice and or. So what that ends up looking like is me talking too much. So when I wrote this, I also kind of embedded the next task point. So it doesn't necessarily have to be this intense. If you want to see some smaller examples, take a look at College Board's website. This is the 2024 FRQ. So this is what I wrote. The Palace of Westminster's Gothic-inspired design, that's me restating the thesis, was chosen through a contest. This is me starting to provide evidence. In the contest, most submitted designs were Gothic revival because of the British sentiment shifting away from the utilitarian and minimalistic aesthetics brought on by rapid technological changes of the Industrial Revolution. See how I'm still talking about Industrial Revolution? That's supporting it. And then the ornate designs of Gothic were thus much more visually appealing. So I'm providing the fact that it was in a contest and explaining how that being in the contest and being Gothic revival relates to how the British were moving towards that more visually appealing rather than kind of boring look and stuff from Industrial Revolution. It's a little long, but it's all related to my thesis and all supporting it with evidence about the contest, about the look, right? So then my second point, second task point here, the Palace of Westminster also was located near other Gothic buildings on the Thames. The British people wanted the new building, which replaced the older palace that had burned down, to fit in with a Gothic style of British history. This maintained the preservation of Britain's pre-industrial past. So I'm saying that it being near Gothic buildings supports the fact that Britain liked Gothic style because that's what was around it. So I'm talking fancy, but that's all I'm really saying, right? By putting Gothic near Gothic, Britain happy. So it has to be related. So it being near Gothic buildings, that's really the evidence, but I'm starting to explain why. And the reason I'm explaining why already is so I can make sure that it's connected to the thesis. However, the next task point is the why. Task 5 is explaining how that evidence supports the claim. Typically, this task point happens at the same exact time as the last one. So if I look again at the previous page here, I'm already discussing how it's about the Industrial Revolution and what the British people thought. So there's already a little flavor of that. I just want to make sure with my why that I'm pushing it enough that there is no doubt, there's no wiggle room for the FRQ readers. They know that I am specifically explaining why, right? So I want to make sure that all that evidence that I put definitely supports it. And you saw I had both a little bit of contextual and visual kind of woven in there. So now I'm going to take that idea and just explain again how it relates to my thesis. The choice of Gothic features, this is my example, like tracery and towers. So this is more evidence I threw in because I'm like, wow, I'm not super confident. I'll throw that in again. The choice of Gothic features like tracery and towers by Puget were deliberate in imposing the industrial modern aesthetic. The ornate designs and intricate architectural features were of a time before industry. The location near other Gothic buildings made this choice feel deliberate in celebrating the past and past designs. So I'm backing up and explaining why the look of Gothic, like tracery, towers, ornate, that I mentioned in this section here, supports the idea. And then I'm talking about how it being near other buildings supports my idea. I want to talk about how both are connected to the thesis. Again, this task point might naturally happen up in here, and you could just write the why right next to your evidence. It would be easier for me to say the ornate Gothic designs, such as tracery, were more visually appealing because it was related to pre-industrial Britain, blah, 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 blah. So task 5, I could just weave in with task 3 and 4. But I want to make sure that I get it, so I just added a little bit more. That brings us to the last one. This is where a lot of people get really confused, and before you panic, these are 2 different options for examples. So the last task point, task 6, asks you to corroborate or qualify your claim by explaining relevant connections, providing nuance, or considering diverse views. This basically just means that you need to give more evidence that you haven't discussed yet or more information related to this topic. You're not going off and talking about a totally unrelated thing like, oh, look at how much I know about Birth of Venus. That's not relevant here. You have to still stay relevant. What I have always loved doing and suggesting is compare the artwork to something else. If you talk about something else that's related to the topic, you can use that something else to either back up the ideas you're saying or contrast the ideas that you're saying. It could almost be like a, counter argument. So I have two options here. One, I compare it directly to a painting at the same time. And then the other one, I'm giving more like just contextual information about the architecture it was based on. Because the whole thing was about being based on architecture, I thought, oh, I should probably talk about what it was based on. That's nuance, it's adding more. So again, these two down here are two different options. I would not include both, it would take too much time. So option one of what I wrote, the Gothic revival of the Palace of Westminster matched the shift in artistic traditions in Europe at the time. Romantic artwork like Turner's Slave Ship similarly rejected classicism and the effects of the Industrial Revolution, where Slave Ship commented on the consequences of the slave trade through emotional seascapes and vigorous brushwork. The Palace of Westminster appealed to the wider public's nostalgia of the visual intricacies of the Gothic past. So in that, I'm saying, oh, look, they're both looking at emotion and the past and what's happening in the world because of the effects of industry. So that's how I'm getting my nuance point there. Another option is that I say that the choice to use Gothic architecture as a base for the Palace for Kings highlighted the connection between religion and monarchy. Gothic architecture was primarily used in pilgrimage churches like Chartres Cathedral. Choosing to reference religious buildings purposely tied the monarchy and Britain to the impact and power of Christianity. Ironically, Westminster would later become Parliament, in which democratic decisions would be made rather than monarchical or religious rule. So I'm showing that I understand that this is based on Gothic works like Chartres, and that I understand on a wider context what that means: religion, power, and then government. So both of those are options where I'm kind of bringing other pieces in to back up my points, whether it's about being against industry or about the Gothic, since those were the two main ideas from my thesis. This seems like a lot, but again, this one's only 6 task points. So if you have a strong thesis and you just keep going, you can absolutely nail this. All you need for this one is 3 points to pass. It's a long FRQ, but it's about the same as all the short ones. The short ones are 5 points. This one's 6 points. That's not too bad. So look at the artworks that they give you. Pick one that you feel confident about with the prompt. Pay attention to the prompt. And then make that thesis about the prompt. Say something that has some meat to it, that's powerful, that means something, not just completely restating the prompt, but saying something about the prompt. The artwork is this way because of this big concept. And then you back it up, back it up, back it up. That's what the argumentative FRQ is all about. Think of sitting in class and all the good discussions we have about artwork. Think about things that you liked about pieces, things that you hated about pieces, and put that energy into the argumentative FRQ. You totally got this. Always just keep writing. The only way that you get 0 points is by not writing anything. So write, and you'll do fine on this FRQ. Good luck, guys.